The briefing documents for the Vithari Imperial Court were thorough in the way of documents produced by an organization that valued thoroughness, and had been producing documents about the Vithari Court for 40 years. Thorough on the protocol, thorough on the governance structure, thorough on the historical context that explained why the court operated the way it operated. The word compelling appeared in the documents 7 times across 4 separate entries, each time in reference to Queen Sarath's presence, and each time followed by a construction that acknowledged the inadequacy of the word, compelling in a way that accounts struggle to specify, compelling in the manner that court observers have consistently noted without being able to fully characterize, compelling to an unusual degree that the following accounts attempt to convey. Marin Solis read the word compelling 7 times and filed it in the category of things that would become more meaningful once he had experienced the referent, and moved on to the protocol sections, which were extensive and specific, and which he studied with the thoroughness of someone who understood that the word compelling in briefing documents was less immediately dangerous than a protocol failure in an imperial court. He arrived at the Vithari Imperial Court on the morning of the quarterly governance review, which was not the ideal day for an interim attaché's first session, but was the day his rotation produced, and was therefore the day he was working with. He took the observer's gallery position, the standard accord attaché position, elevated with sightlines to the court chamber's full extent, and set up his documentation tablet with the methodical attention of someone beginning a formal record. The court convened. The council members took their positions. The ceremonial officials completed the opening protocol that the briefing documents had described, and that was executing exactly as described, which was reassuring in the way that correct execution of familiar information was reassuring when everything else was new. And then Queen Sarath entered the court chamber. The word compelling, which Marin had filed in the category of experientially dependent information, became immediately meaningful in the way that experiential understanding always was more meaningful than conceptual understanding, and also immediately insufficient in the way that the briefing documents had already noted, and that he was now understanding from the inside. The court chamber had a quality it had not had before she entered. He tried to identify what had changed. The lighting was unchanged. The acoustic properties of the space were unchanged. The assembled court members were in the same positions they had been in before her entrance. Everything observable was continuous with what had been observable before, and yet the quality of the room had shifted in a way that his observational training was registering as significant, and his analytical framework was not providing a category for. He looked at the court members. They were oriented toward Queen Sarath with the quality the word compelling had been attempting to describe, not the formal attention of a court addressing its sovereign, but a quality of attention that was in the attention itself, as though the attention had a different weight in the room now than it had had 2 minutes ago. He looked at Queen Sarath. She was in ceremonial court dress, Vithari in the specific way of the long tapered ears and the bone structure of the governing bloodline, conducting herself with the ease of a sovereign in her court, and also with something else. Something in the posture that was not the ease but was underneath it. A quality of sustained effort that was visible if you were looking at her face, rather than at the quality her presence had produced in the room. She was looking at the court. Then she was looking at him, briefly. The new attaché assessment that his 3 weeks would eventually teach him, she performed at the opening of each session with the thoroughness of someone who monitored her environment as an operational practice. Her expression, when she looked at him, had something in it that the formal record would not capture, and that his notation column was going to spend 3 weeks attempting to categorize. He looked at his tablet and started the formal record. In the personal notation column, he wrote, "Something is happening in this room that I do not have a description for yet." By the end of the first week, the notation column had 22 entries about Queen Sarath's expression and 4 entries about everything else. He was aware that this ratio reflected a distribution of observational attention that the division's protocol would not consider ideal. He was also aware that the distribution reflected the genuine information density of what he was observing. The court's proceedings were documentable with the formal record's standard categories, and Queen Sarath's expression during the proceedings was not documentable with any existing category, and was therefore the more urgent documentation problem. The pattern had become visible by the end of the second session. The compelling quality that her presence produced in the court chamber, whatever the field was that the briefing documents had been circling with the word compelling, did not produce in him the experience it produced in the court members. He could observe the experience in the court members. He could see the quality of their attention, the specific weight of their orientation toward her, the way the room organized itself around her presence. He could observe all of this from the gallery with the clear, professional attention of someone who was watching a phenomenon and recording it. He could not feel it. The room did not change quality when she entered, for him. His attention was not modified in the way the court member's attention was modified. He was watching her with the ordinary attention of someone who had been trained to observe and was observing, and the ordinary attention was producing ordinary observation, which was a woman in ceremonial court dress performing a role with extraordinary skill and with something in her expression during the performance that the performance was not accounting for. The gap was what his notation column was documenting. She said something in the chamber's second formal session that produced agreement in the council members. A governance position that the council received with the quality of people whose agreement was already oriented before the reasoning was presented. Her expression when the agreement arrived was not satisfaction. He filed it as expression type 2, content discrepancy, agreement context. She said something in the third session that produced deference from the council's senior faction, a deference that came quickly, with a quality of inevitability that the governance position alone did not seem to fully account for. Her expression during the deference was not confidence. He filed it as expression type 3, content discrepancy, deference context. By the end of the first week, he had 5 expression types in the notation column and a working theory about what the expression types shared, which was, they were all expressions visible in the gap between what the court was receiving and what she was producing when they received it. The court was receiving the field. She was producing the person. The expressions were the person, visible in the moments when the field's overlay was what the court was responding to, and she knew it. He managed his notation attention as best he could. He distributed the formal records entries to cover the full session's content. He maintained the appropriate peripheral quality in the gallery, looking at the tablet at regular intervals, scanning the chamber rather than fixing on a specific subject. He managed it with the tools available to him, which were not sufficient for the density of his actual observational attention, which was too focused to manage fully without falsifying the record, which his professional practice did not permit. In the third week's primary session, she looked at him twice during the proceedings. The looks had a different quality than the opening assessment. They were the looks of someone who had noticed a pattern and was determining its meaning. Her expression during both looks was expression type 7, which he filed as, no current description, requires further observation. The court liaison who delivered the summons did so with professional neutrality, and the professional neutrality told him more than the neutrality was intended to convey. He prepared for the audience with the composure of someone who had known, for approximately 2 weeks, that the insufficiency of his management was going to produce an audience, and who had decided that when the audience came, he was going to give it the same quality of honest attention he had been giving the notation column. The audience chamber was the size of a conversation rather than a performance, and Queen Serath was in it when he arrived, which was a configuration that told him she had thought about how to structure this. She looked at him when he entered with the full quality of her attention, which was different from the court session looks in the way that full, unmanaged attention was different from directed assessment. He registered it with the practiced attention of 3 weeks of notation entries, and with the additional quality of someone in the room with the subject of 47 notation entries, for the first time without a gallery between them. Why are your eyes always on me, human? The question was precise, standard, with something underneath the formality. The pattern he had been documenting, the gap between the presented surface and what was in the surface when you looked at it directly. He was looking at it directly. He opened his mouth. He had the professional answer prepared, the documentation protocol, the primary subject requirement, the standard observational practice of an accorded échec. He had practiced the professional answer with the thoroughness of someone who had been expecting this conversation for 2 weeks. He looked at her expression. Expression type 7, no current description. He closed his mouth. I can see you, he said. She looked at him. The court cannot see you. I don't know what they see. I can observe that what they see affects them in a way that what I see doesn't affect me, but I can see you. Your face. What your face is doing during the proceedings. He looked at the tablet, not because he needed to, but because he was describing the notation column, and the notation column was what he was describing. The gap between what the court hears and what your expression contains when they hear it. He paused. I kept looking because what I was seeing was more informative than what I could see anywhere else in the room, and I'm trained to record what is informative. She looked at him for a moment that had a quality he had not produced in 3 weeks of session documentation, which was the quality of something that was not being managed for an audience, because there was no audience, and the field apparently did not change what he saw regardless. She sat down. The sitting had the weight of a decision, not the physical act, but the quality of someone for whom sitting in a particular chair in a particular way was a choice that had meaning. "Tell me," she said, "what you see." He told her from the notation column, the expression types in chronological order, the specific instances, the pattern that the instances formed across 3 weeks of sessions. He told her with the accuracy of someone reporting a documentation record rather than an impression, which meant the telling was specific, and the specificity was the thing that distinguished it from the many things people had presumably said to her that were not specific, because they had not been seeing what he was seeing. She listened. He watched her listen, and her expression was expression type 7, and it was doing what expression type 7 did, which was the thing he had not been able to describe. When he finished, the audience chamber held the telling in the way of rooms that have been asked to hold something larger than their function implied. She was quiet with the quality of someone who has been afraid of a specific moment for a long time, and who is now in the moment, and finding it different from the fear, not easier, but different in the specific way of things that are real rather than anticipated. "No one has ever described what you are describing," she said, "in 23 years of reign." He waited. She told him about the Sarath field. She told him with the precise language of someone who had been living inside a thing for 23 years, and had developed, through necessity, the most accurate available description of it, and who was using that description for the first time with someone who could understand it from the outside rather than experiencing it from the inside. The bioelectric presence effect, the perception modification, the sovereign role replacement, what the court saw when they looked at her versus what she produced when they looked at her. The 11 generations. The 60 to 70% reduction in non-Vithari. "I didn't experience the compelling effect," he said. "Not at all, not from the first session." She looked at him with the quality of integrating a data point that revised the conclusion she had been working toward. A complete immunity, not documented in the literature. He thought about what that meant, about what it meant for a sovereign whose presence effect replaced her entirely in her court's perception to encounter someone for whom the replacement produced zero effect, which meant the someone was seeing her, and only her, without the overlay, without the role, without the 23 years of modified perception that had meant the court had not seen her face since she took the reign. "That must be very lonely," he said. She looked at him with expression type 7. "Yes," she said, "it is." He sat in the chair across from hers, which was not the observer's position, and which he took because the observer's position was the position of someone documenting the conversation, and this was not a conversation to be documented. "The field," he said. "If I can see through it, if the modification doesn't affect me, is that permanent? Is it specific to me?" She had been running this analysis. He could see it in the quality of her answer, not the constructed answer of someone developing a response, but the delivered answer of someone who had completed the analysis and was reporting its conclusions. "Complete immunity is not documented in the literature," she said. "I cannot tell you whether it is permanent or specific. I can tell you that in 3 weeks of sessions it has been consistent." "The political architecture," he said, "the field's role in the legitimacy of the reign. If the court understood that their experience of you was modified, that the compelling quality was biological, they might question the authenticity of their support," she said, "which is the question that would be most useful to my political opponents, and which they have been looking for a justification to raise for 11 years. He looked at the tablet. He looked at the notation column, which had 47 entries about her expression, and which was part of his formal documentation record, and which was therefore technically accessible to the division's filing system, and through the filing system to anyone who requested the Accord's attaché documentation for the Vithari court, which was a public record. He made the decision, not the professional decision, not the contrary to professional decision, the decision of someone who had been seeing clearly for 3 weeks and knew what the clear seeing required of him. He opened the tablet. He navigated to the notation column. He selected the 47 entries. He moved them to a locally stored document with no network connection. The formal record, he said, documents the court proceedings. The governance review outcomes, the sovereign's conduct in the proceedings. He closed the tablet. The personal notation column is now empty. She looked at the tablet. She looked at him with expression type 7, which he had a description for now. You've protected the record, she said. I've moved 47 accurate entries to local storage, he said, with the distinction that mattered to him. They are documented. They will remain documented. They are not in a place that creates a risk. Why? The question had the quality he had learned to hear in her voice. Not the sovereign's why, which managed the response it was looking for, but the person's why, which did not know the answer and needed it. He thought about the notation column and the 3 weeks and the expression that had been in her face for 23 years without anyone describing it. He thought about the briefing documents and their 7 uses of compelling and their acknowledgement that compelling was insufficient and their inability to provide a better word. Because none of the people writing the documents had been able to see through the field well enough to see what was behind it. Because the record exists to document what is true, he said. And what is true is that you are governing well. The briefing documents established that before I arrived, and the 3 weeks have confirmed it. He looked at her face, which was doing the thing he could now describe. The field is a biological function you didn't choose. The governance decisions are yours. A record that documented the field without that context would be accurate about an incomplete truth, and incomplete truth is not the same as accurate documentation. She was quiet. The audience chamber held the quiet in the way of rooms that have received something they were built for without knowing they were built for it. The expression, she said, the notation category. No current description, requires further observation. I have a description now. What is it? He looked at her face, which had the expression, which had a description, which he had found in the audience chamber, because the audience chamber was the room where the performance was suspended, and the person was what was present. Present, he said. The expression is present. It's what you look like when you're fully in a moment without the performance. He paused. I've been watching it for 3 weeks from the gallery. It's more present from here. She was very still. The expression was in her face with the quality of something that had been accurately named for the first time and was receiving the naming. Present, she said. Yes. She was quiet for a moment that had the quality of someone sitting with the accurate name of something they have been carrying without a name. 8 weeks, she said. Possibly 10 if the leave extends. Yes, and after 8 to 10 weeks, the senior attaché returns, and you rotate to another assignment, and the replacement experiences the field at 30 to 40% modification, and the observer's gallery returns to the standard configuration. Standard rotation, he said. Yes. She looked at the tablet. She looked at him with the expression that had a description. She was doing the calculation he could see her doing, which was the calculation of what 8 weeks of a person who could see her clearly was worth, which was a calculation she had not had the variable for before this afternoon. The afternoon session, she said. The infrastructure allocation review, the factional contention underlying it is layered. A senior attaché with court familiarity would understand the layers. An interim with 3 weeks would produce documentation that missed the context, he said. The historical council records would provide the context, she said. 7 years of infrastructure allocation dispute indexed. If you had those records, your documentation of the afternoon session would be significantly better, he said, useful to the division rather than simply accurate. Then I will have the records sent to your quarters. She stood. The standing was the return to the performance's requirements, and he watched her make the return and watched what the return looked like in the expression. The present quality moving to its managed position, the distance re-establishing itself, the sovereign coming back to the surface with the ease of someone who had been doing it for 23 years. She paused at the exit. She turned. The notation entries, she said, the 47 in local storage. Yes, they are accurate. Yes, and they will remain documented. Yes, they'll remain documented for as long as I maintain the local storage, which is indefinitely, which is how I maintain all accurate documentation. She looked at him with expression type 7, present, from across the audience chamber with the exit at her back. 8 weeks, she said. Possibly 10, he said. The exit opened. She went through it. It closed. He sat in the audience chamber for a moment with the tablet and the moved notation entries, and the afternoon session beginning in 37 minutes. and he thought about the specific quality of a conversation with someone who had been fully present in it, and the expression that was present, and the 23 years it had been in her face without anyone providing the accurate notation. He opened the tablet. He created a new notation column, separate from the formal record, locally stored, titled in the way that accurate documentation was titled, with the date, the subject, and the notation's purpose, which was ongoing documentation, personal archive, Vithari Imperial Court interim appointment. First entry, expression type 7. Description confirmed, present. The expression is what she looks like when she is fully in a moment without the field's performance requirement. First clearly observed in private audience, 3rd week. Context. She received an accurate description of something she had been carrying without an accurate description for 23 years. The receiving produced the expression at its clearest observed instance. Filed under, expression type 7, description confirmed. Note, expression requires continued observation across sessions to fully document contextual variation. No projected completion date. He closed the tablet. He collected his things and left the audience chamber and walked back through the Vithari Imperial Court's corridors toward the observers' gallery, where the afternoon session's formal documentation was going to begin in 33 minutes, and where the historical council records were going to arrive before the session, and were going to make the documentation significantly more useful to the division than it had been. The court moved around him in the way of courts moving, the specific, practiced efficiency of an institution that had been running for 17 centuries and knew how to run. The field moved through the corridors ahead of the Queen, arriving before her in the way of bioelectric presence effects, orienting the court members toward the sovereign role before the sovereign's person reached them. He walked through it without experiencing it. The corridors had the quality corridors had. The court members had the quality of people going about their work. Everything was what it was. He reached the observers' gallery. He set up the documentation tablet. The historical council records arrived through the formal interoffice delivery system 4 minutes before the session began. 7 years of infrastructure allocation dispute. Indexed. Delivered by a court administrative officer who delivered them with the professional neutrality of someone executing a sovereign's directive and not commenting on the directive's content. He read the index. He opened the first file. He had 27 minutes. He used them. The afternoon session convened. Queen Sarath entered the court chamber, and the chamber changed in the way the chamber changed when she entered, and the court members oriented toward the field with the compelling quality that the briefing documents had been circling for 40 years. And in the observers' gallery, one court-attaché was watching the session with the full, clear attention of someone who could see through the field to the person inside it, and who was documenting both, the formal record in the tablet's main column, and the expression types in the local archive, and the gap between what the court was receiving and what she was producing when they received it. Expression type 7, present, confirmed, he documented it. He would document it for 8 weeks, possibly 10. The documentation would be thorough and accurate and more useful than any documentation the Vithari Court Observers Gallery had produced, and some of it would be in the division's formal record, and some of it would be in local storage, and all of it would be accurate, which was the only standard that his professional practice had ever required. 8 weeks, he opened the notation column. He was thorough about it.